Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome to Boston Harbor Now's Harbor Use Forum in November. We're going to give people a couple minutes to join. Thank you so much for joining us today. This session is being recorded. Since this is a Zoom meeting and not a Zoom webinar, you have the option to turn on your camera and microphone, but please only unmute when you're speaking. It'll improve the audio quality for everyone. You can feel free to say hello in the chat. The chat should be in the bottom center of your screen. Feel free to use that to say hi to the whole group or to any of the panelists. You can also use, if you're on a smartphone or a tablet, the chat function might not come up automatically. You're going to want to tap your screen and click the little 3-dot icon, and that will give you more options, and the chat is there. If you want to know who else is here, we've had people say, I want to know who else is coming to these forums. You're welcome to click on the participants panel. The participants panel tells you who is here. It also gives you a feature where you can raise your hand if you have a question. So feel free to use that function. And then I also want to introduce you to the reaction button at the bottom of your screen. The reaction button, which is of course not showing up because I'm sharing my screen and doing too many things at once. But when that pops up, you have the option to give us a thumbs up as well as other icons. And we encourage you to use that function, the reaction function, to tell us, yes, no, etc., to questions that Bud is going to ask. So with that, welcome again, and I'm going to turn it over to Bud.
Thank you, Alice. Nice to see everybody this morning. And if everybody hasn't noticed, Alice has become the Zoom queen of North America. Every one of these presentations, we get added new features, which makes it more interactive and more useful. Thank you very much, Alice. I'm a board member at Boston Harbor Now. I think, as most of you know, I chair the Policy and Planning Committee of Boston Harbor Now. This is our 7th Visual Harbor Use Forum of the year. So we've continued apace, undaunted by the pandemic and the elections and everything else going on. Our first virtual forum was back in April, was on the same topic that we're going to address today. And that was the 4.100 acres open space plan. At that meeting, BPDA and Sasaki presented 3 different options. You'll notice now, several months later, Joe Christo has 10 times as much hair as he did then. Rich McGinnis has about the same. But what we're going to hear today is, I think, is a final or almost near final proposal that has emerged from all the work and various meetings and things over the last several months. So we look forward to that. If this is your first time joining a harbor use public forum with BHN, we're an organization committed to creating an accessible and resilient waterfront for everyone. Several members of the Boston Harbor Now staff are with us today, including Alice Brown, who you've heard opening up and will be our moderator of the Q&A, Kathy Abbott, who's our president and CEO, and Aaron Toffler, the director of policy, and various others from the staff. We convene these harbor use forums monthly to hear from developers, city officials, public agencies, and other advocates about work taking place around the waterfront. We believe very strongly the waterfront belongs to all of us. And we bring together these interactive conversations so we can help ensure better, more thoughtful, and dynamic projects. So now comes the interactive part that Alice has served up for me. Alice, does everybody know what to do as I ask these questions?
I'm going to go over that again. If you are used to using Zoom, you've probably met these features before, but again, at the bottom of your screen, in the same place that you might mute or stop video in the bottom left, you have the option in the middle to chat, and next to that should be a button that says reactions. And if you click on that, look for the thumbs up button and give us a thumbs up if Bud's questions are true for you.
All right, so here we go. First off, give a thumbs up if this is your first time participating in a harbor use forum. Wow, everybody's been here before, pretty much. Give a thumbs up if this is the first time you've seen a presentation on this subject, the 100 acres plan for 4-point channel.
We've got a few people who are new. That's great.
You new folks, great. Give a thumbs up if you live in the 4 Point neighborhood, the Seaport, or South Boston.
Got a couple thumbs up from locals.
And a lot of folks interested in the Seaport, although not living there, which is great. Give a thumbs up if you live in a different part of the city. I presume that's everybody who didn't have a thumbs up on the last one. And give a thumbs up if you visit this part of 4 Point Channel occasionally or frequently today. Great. So thank you very much. That gives us a good sense of who's here. A lot is changing around this part of 4 Point Channel, including new developments at 50 Necco Street and along A Street, both of which were presented at past forums. These will transform parking lots into new development. I was looking at some numbers the other day. I think the Seaport used to have 60 to 70,000 parking spaces. It now has 60 to 70,000 people working there, or something close to that. So quite a transformation. You'll see today some ideas for making this a much more accessible and much better space along the waterfront. I think one of our particular goals at Boston Harbor Now is to see both how we can have a more resilient waterfront, but also one that is more inclusive and more welcoming to everyone in the city of Boston. We're particularly interested to see as well how all the developments, including the 100 acres along the 4 Point Channel, can create a contiguous line of protection as green as possible, not only to protect everything that's newly built along the waterfront, but inland residents and workplaces as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it, Alice, do I go back over to you, or where do we go from here?
Yep, you can introduce Rich and Joe.
Hi, Rich. Welcome, Rich McGinnis and Joe Christo from BPDA. I think most of you know them well. They've been honchoing this particular project from the beginning, and we look forward to hearing where you're at today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bud and Alice. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us here today. Really excited to present where we're at with the 100 acres open space plan. And I'm going to hand it off to Rich to go through a little bit of background of the planning process. Then I'll talk about the current community engagement we've done, and then we'll go through and discuss the preferred direction draft plan and show where we're at now. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see if this works. I had some trouble with this the other day, but let's give it a shot. Is everyone seeing my presentation right now?
Yep, that's up.
Fantastic. All right, Rich, have at it.
So, Bud, thank you for the introduction. I'm Rich McGinnis, Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning from the Boston Planning and Development Agency. The 4 Point Channel was actually my first planning effort 20 years ago when I started with the BPDA. It was a unique planning process in that we were planning the water body itself, not the land, to act as public realm, stitching together downtown Boston and South Boston's waterfront. I'm glad you remarked, Bud, on the broader South Boston waterfront Seaport District. The Seaport Public Realm Plan that dates to 1999 envisioned a network of open space, but more modest sort of promenades, not a lot of aggregated open space. The South Boston Waterfront District Municipal Harbor Plan in 2000 sort of modified that, pushing for about 50% open space throughout the kind of build out area in the South Boston waterfront. But a lot of that was roadways and sidewalks. Did have an opportunity to aggregate open space, but really left it just blank, just vacant kind of green spaces, unprogrammed. Most of the waterfront open space subject to Chapter 91 are Commonwealth tidelands. And there's two different types of tidelands, private tidelands and Commonwealth tidelands. And Commonwealth tidelands have a higher public purpose, not just being available, but actually being programmed and designed to be attractive, engaging, active. When the 2000 Municipal Harbor Plan was approved by the state, they asked the city to do more planning for the 4 Point area, for this 100 acres master planning area, to sort of reflect comments that we got from Gillette, P&G, but to also come up with a better approach to build out an open space. So that kicked off a planning process that took 6 years, where we engaged the community and the property owners on a build out. And this image you see today is the 100 acres open space and build out plan that shows you building footprints that are authorized through the zoning and open space that is required to be built out as part of that trade-off. Next slide, Joe. So just zooming in a little bit. So we did this master planning process and it was codified in the zoning, and it requires as part of the trade-off that property owners provide the land and the funds to build out open spaces and streets. If a property owner did not have actually land to provide, they would be kicking in funds to build this open space. And I think a total was about a little under 7 acres of true green space, including the A Street Park on the over to the left side. So this was the result of that planning process and the zoning. But as you can see, we know the meets and bounds, the size, the location of the open spaces, but there was no design or program associated with it. It was just shown as green, and wanted to fill that void. And when we were approving the former GE site a few years ago, I think almost 5 years ago now, and we knew that that development was going to build out a portion of this open space, we thought, well, gee, it would be good to think about how these open spaces are designed and programmed. It also gave us an opportunity to update the city's resilience plans. How do we address the impacts of climate change? This area is currently in a floodplain, and it's only going to get worse with sea level rise. It's a near-term flood path. And the 2006 master plan did not reflect that, did not reflect the need for additional tree canopy, the need for stormwater retention. Another thing you'll notice is that there are a lot of roadways, new roadways anticipated here. It seemed very transportation centric, the 2006 plan. And we've been working with the city's transportation department, our own transportation planners, on a series of transportation plans, going back to 2016, South Boston Waterfront Transportation Plan, and a new Seaport transit plan that's underway, where the roadway networks, you can just expand it to a certain point that the external roadway network's not going to support more single occupancy vehicles. So we've been pushing for more better use of the roadways for pedestrians and bikes, and actually reducing the roadway network and opportunities to create open space. We've taken some bold steps to increase the amount of open space in this district, looking at rearranging buildings, both up on the Gillette, former Gillette holdings, up by Open Space FT2, but also by the post office, keeping about the same building volume, but actually able to increase the open space by another 4 acres. And that's in addition to A Street Park. Now, on A Street Park, which is a great park, it holds a lot of programming. There's a half basketball court, there's a dog park, there's like a small size field that you could use for kind of informal sports. There's community gardens, there's a tot lot. It just shows you the need for programmed open space in this neighborhood. We had a great public engagement process to determine what got built out there, and hope we can continue that type of amenity for the neighborhood in these other parks. Another thing about A Street Park is that it was transferred to the Parks Department, which really wasn't anticipated, but it ended up being a good outcome. It's owned by the Parks Department, but it's maintained by the property ownership. And we aspire to do the same for these other parks, either owned by the Parks Department or a nonprofit, that we could take over control, and that the maintenance would be funded by the developers. Next slide, Joe.
Great. So building from what Rich said, we knew that we really needed to go beyond what those meets and bounds were for the open space, and really better define what the program, resiliency, and really design features were. So we released an RFP, I believe it was sometime in maybe June or July 2019. And Sasaki was selected through that RFP process to be our consultant to build out this open space plan. And has been on board since September 2019 doing so, and has been an absolutely fantastic partner in doing this work. And so we've really wanted this to be a community-led effort, as Rich said, as the 100 Acres master planning process was. And so we've held two large pre-COVID, obviously, community engagement events at Artists for Humanity, who was a very helpful partner with this wonderful space and being able to do so. And then a series of smaller engagements, both with community groups and other types of stakeholders throughout the past year, transitioning in April to doing these remotely. One of our first ones was the Boston Harbor Now Forum, which you see here back in April. And so we have been really happy with the guidance and feedback from the community in establishing what those sort of desires are for the area, and then supporting and help us refine those core values that were already baked in from the beginning. And we have a slide that sort of goes into that as well, but especially that inclusion, equity, and resilience. So you see the three themes that we had come down to back in April here, and we kind of have a slide that goes into this again here, and I'll kick it back to Rich to start talking through what those themes are, and him and I will go back and forth as we work through the design slides here.
So after our last kind of public face-to-face engagement in February, we continued to have an online survey and do additional engagement with neighborhood groups, the American City Coalition, with City Hall departments to continue to get feedback in addition to the feedback that we received during those open houses. And the three themes that, as Joe mentioned, was the urban wilderness, which had heavy tree canopy, kind of less space for kind of occupancy, but more of pass-through, something unexpected in this area, which people really liked. The second theme was community living room, still holding a good tree canopy, but having space, more neighborhood amenity space, some green space, some basic program, not a lot of active space. And then theme three, you see more opportunity for active open space. It's the flex space, outdoor gallery, opportunities for public art, programming, and events. And I think what we ended up with was sort of a combination of all of these things. And as Joe mentioned, to provide a public amenity, or a neighborhood amenity for the 4 Point neighborhood, a great open space for them to recreate, enjoy the outdoors, but also a destination quality open space. And this is the preferred direction. So the slide deck we will be posting on the project website, but we will be publishing the draft master plan that will have a lot of backup text, talking about the public process, the planning context, all the plans that apply to this area, how we're tackling resilience, and sort of next steps implementation. But this is the preferred direction, and it's a critical component of the waterfront, where we have two important networks connecting with each other, and that is the South Bay Harbor Trail that starts up by Jamaica Plain at the southwest corridor, goes through Roxbury, the south end, and then connects to the 4 Point Channel. It's always intended to arrive at Fan Pier, at the open spaces of Fan Pier, and hopefully via water transportation connecting over to East Boston and the awesome East Boston Greenway and open space systems there. So this is where the South Bay Harbor Trail connects with Harbor Walk, our 38+ mile waterfront access system. So a really important nexus, and thought it would be a great area to celebrate with open space that is attractive, sort of destination quality So some of the key elements of the open space plan is a waterfront amphitheater, where we're pulling back the land a little bit to create an amphitheater in between buildings G4 and 15 Echo. In a terraced area where people can sit and view the water sheet. Some of the inspiration parks are Tanner Springs Park and the Pearl District in Portland, Oregon. They actually have some really good kind of comparable build out that it's occurred there, but also great open space network. An elevated waterfront plaza with waterfront play, including a fountain in between G4 and 15 Necco. Shaded promenade, generous walkways connecting Necco Street to the water's edge, an active core in between Necco Street, A Street, and West Service, where you have open lawn area, but a lot of amenities for the immediate neighborhood, but the broader community as well. And an active core down by the South Boston Bypass Road, we have opportunity for active recreation with ball courts, a dog park, and other amenities. And then community pockets, just, reflecting sort of buffer parks and amenities for the folks that live there, including down by Medallion Ave. Next slide. So zooming in to the waterfront park.
Before
Yes.
you go ahead, can you go back a slide and Joe can show how the South Bay Harbor Trail ties in for people
Yes.
who don't know the neighborhood?
Yeah, so you see it highlighted here along the Harbor Walk, and then tying in right over here. And this is the sort of point of connectivity right here.
Yeah, so it comes up by the left side of the screen along the 4-point channel. So it travels over the Broadway Bridge and then comes down Broadway along Dorchester Avenue and then hits Harbor Walk along Gillette P&G. It's always been shown in the past of going along Harbor Walk past the Children's Museum and Martin's Park, but it's physically not possible because the bridges are too low. And our goal is to bring it down into and to activate an open space network at the 4-point parks, but also the parks open spaces that will be delivered by Seaport Square. So the goal is to get South Bay Harbor Trail down by sort of to the left side of building G5 into the open space network, either along Wormwood Street or Necco Street, and connecting down to West Service Road. And why West Service Road? Well, West Service Road funds have been given by WS Seaport Square to MassDOT to build out West Service Road. I think it's at 100% design and fully funded. So West Service Road will be connected from this area through Seaport Square with cycle tracks, great pedestrian amenities, and the ability to connect via open space all the way to the ICA and Fan Pier.
It's worth noting too how COVID and the racial justice movement has sort of enhanced the planning that was already going on too. Factors like equity and inclusion and making this a citywide destination, as well as having an open space that is comfortable to be in all day long, were already core to the plan. But since COVID began, as well as since the social and racial justice movements that have been going on throughout the country, more prominently lately as well, those features of the plan have become even more important. And in the outreach that we've been doing since March, those have really been featured. And so things like shaded structures to be able to spend an afternoon there, and outlets, outdoor outlets, as well as having the socially distant space between, having big open green spaces between certain areas. Those have all become even more important now. Anything else on that point, Rich? Or
People want to feel welcome to these spaces, not feel like they're trespassing, that they're not, an amenity for a commercial building. They're not a corporate campus. I think what we heard from a lot of the families that the American City Coalition helped us engage with, they're like, they would like to go down to the water. They want better access, including parking and just better connectivity to public transportation, but also the ability to stay there for, you know, a full day, not just a pass through. So multi-generational amenities, including, you know, a fountain, grills, picnic tables, interior public amenities, including public bathrooms, facilities, restaurants, what have you, food services that offer a diversity of food, but also food, you know, at reasonable prices. And these are all things that are integrated into this plan, is to create that destination where somebody could go down here and enjoy the day, and have a ton of amenities to keep everyone occupied. Next slide. So this is zooming in to the park in between G4 and 15 Necco, and just again jumping back to the great timing of this effort, was that, you know, this really originated, you know, when we started to think about designing these parks, was when the GE project, now 15 Necco, was going through permitting, and we're like, oh, a portion of the central park was going to be built. We should think about how it's designed. If we put in a requirement for GE that they would design whatever they were going to build along there, this left side of 15 Necco, to meet whatever we came out of this public process. Who knew that Gillette would start selling off great, you know, big holdings of their site? I don't think we ever expected it. And then being acquired by Related Beal to build out 244 A Street. We never really thought things would move this quickly. So the good news is that what we're designing today could be implemented probably within 3 or 4 years, which really wasn't expected. The post office, who knows what will occur there? Maybe they get wind of how much this land is selling for, and will think about perhaps selling off more real estate and implementing this vision. And we're going to talk a little bit about our resilience in a couple of the other slides, but this just shows you a zoomed in section of this waterfront park, where the first planning effort I worked on was the Full Point Channel watershed activation, and we're proposing things in the watershed to activate the watershed. You'll see a number 12, that's the existing dock that's there for kayaking, canoeing, touch and go for vessels. Number 6 is a floating stage. This is a seawall basin as planned by the watershed activation plan that can be programmed by floating arts barges, performance barges, and then opportunity for floating wetlands. But starting at number 1, I'll jump back to number 1, is the waterfront amphitheater, where we're terracing back, integrating the resilience, the target elevation for a flood barrier along here into the design. A great landscape kind of flood defense mechanism shouldn't feel like a flood defense mechanism. It should be integrated in a great open space that you don't even know it's there. And that's the goal here. An opportunity for a landmark piece of art. Is it permanent? Is it something that's revolving, working with the city's artist communities? Number 3 is a hammock grove. Again, thinking about public amenities that are unique, that, you know, would sort of underscore that this is a public space, you know, something interesting and active. A water fountain, a water feature, which we think is a great attraction for children, but something that we need to be careful about designing, thinking about the winter months, like a day like today. There's a fountain in the north end along the Rose Kennedy Greenway that has a great transition design, where it's an awesome fountain during the warmer months, but is more of a plaza area off season. Shade structures, just thinking about heat island effect with hotter days in the future with climate change. I mentioned the floating stage, floating wetlands, something that could be programmed through community groups, school groups, a waterfront plaza stage on number 8 that would be integrated into open space, where you could have performances, but just have general outdoor seating. swings, actually stationed kind of fixed swings along Harbor Walk. If you look up to the left at number 9, wanted to be careful about these spaces where the Harbor Walk's at a lower level and you have these green spaces at a higher level close to the building, that we do not want the buildings privatizing these spaces just by the landform. You'll see examples of kind of perceived privatization along Fan Pier, where you have Great Harbor Walk, you've got a kind of lawn area that doesn't seem very welcoming. And then it goes towards the restaurants where there's outdoor dining, but it just seems privatized. So we're proposing sort of unique features that people will just, I guess, run to and use, as opposed to maybe a few benches or just, landscape area. A promenade in an urban forest, so still finding opportunities for great tree canopy and shade, stormwater retention, and shared street. Joe, if you go to the next slide.
Yeah, and just real quick, Rich had mentioned this, and I think most folks on the call know this as well. But this has been a complicated level of coordination with both Related Beal and National Development, who have been great partners in really respecting having this plan sort of go out first, and then sort of adapting their development plans to it. So we're all sort of working together towards those same goals, especially around resilience. And on that point too, another factor is the berm that goes along the channel that we have applied for and are in the process of hopefully receiving soon a $10 million FEMA grant to help fund this $20 million project that runs along the channel. Sorry, trying to get my cursor over there, along the channel and then all the way down to around the bend and towards Dorchester Avenue. It's a mixed berm and seawall. This project that was proposed initially in Climate Ready South Boston, and it's just a great way to bring together the various levels of planning, both in the public and private realm, to really enhance the neighborhood and enhance the resilience of the neighborhood as well.
Hey, Joe, will you zoom out and let's just go through the right of way for the berm?
Yeah.
So the city did Coastal Resilience Solutions for South Boston. A report came out in 2 years ago, and that looked at where South Boston waterfront would flood, where the flood paths. So what areas of the shoreline will allow waters into the community. And we looked at different sea level rise projections, 9 inches by sort of 2030, 2050, and 40 inches by 2070. And that's that 40-inch sea level rise projection, looking at areas that would flood during a 1% 100-year storm, and establishing a target elevation. How high should a flood barrier be, and what's the right of way? So that report was put out, and that's actually what initiated our application for a FEMA grant, this pre-disaster mitigation grant that pays up to $10 million, and the mayor committed to matching that for another $10 million. So that project starts up by Dot Ave, up by the left side of this image, goes along Gillette P&G, and then integrates behind the pump house, and then connects up along Harbor Walk, and then integrates into the commitment from National 15 NECO to build up their site to an elevation of 20. So our target elevation is 21. The elevation for 15 NECO is 20, but their open space will be designed to be 21. So it's all meeting our sort of target goals. It's a 40-foot sort of right of way. So, say none of these projects occur, the market tanks, hopefully not, but we can still proceed. Gillette P&G reached out to us in 2018 saying they believe in the risks and were willing to provide the right of way for the flood barrier. So we do have a right of way secured in the funds to build sort of a modest kind of clay berm, but our preference is to integrate it into this open space network. So we'll be doing an environmental assessment shortly. We got sort of the thumbs up from FEMA to move to that level, which is really great news. And that after that occurs, we'll have the funds and we'll kick off the permitting, design, and then construction. We'll have 4 years to build that out, which is about the same time frame for these development projects.
Rich, I wonder if I could just interject since you're on this subject. At some point, will we all be able to see some kind of site plan or concept or sketch that actually shows all of these projects, from the Gillette berm to Related Beal, National Development, and now this work on 100 acres, so that we can see how they all tie together?
Yeah, well, we can do that, but the 15 Necco site has been approved, so we can certainly show you kind of the, not the as-builts, but the approved project and how that relates to this proposed flood berm. We have been meeting individually with these property owners, but collectively to sort out the design issues and the implementation of this berm. 244A Street, you know, parcels G4, 5, and 6 are still going through the permitting process, and they'll be required through their scope under Article 80 to respond and integrate the design of this open space. But we are stitching together their kind of proposed site plans, elevations, and you'll see that this image right here shows you the elevations proposed and required for the projects, and then this red line is the line of protection, whether it's a clay berm or sheet piling that stitches the two sites together.
And you know, I think you start to get that here in this plan, you know, because we have been coordinating collectively both with, you know, Related and National quite often. And just to go back to something Richard said before, they're actually at 20.5 outside the building, not 20. So they are meeting those sort of resiliency goals set in Climate Ready Boston. And you're starting to see that picture come together here. Because the FEMA berm is also sort of referenced and incorporated into how this design looks as well.
Yeah, not to dwell on it. That's good. But I was also thinking of all the pedestrian and linkages that go through here. Right now, we see paths sort of ending in white space, and it would be really great to see how it all connects together. Thank you.
You got it.
And this image here, Joe, we just want to go back to that last slide. So Harbor Walk would be at a lower elevation, utilizing the same seawall, and then stepping back about 5 feet, stepping up. So we want to meet, you know, ADA, not even just a minimum, but we want to have a great transition for every ability to get down to the water's edge. So you'll see these ramps that are integrated into, and paths integrated into the landscape that will bring you down to Harbor Walk. If you look at in the top right, you'll see a path transitioning down to the water's edge on the 15 Necco development site. One of our remarks kind of comments on the open space plan that if you move to the left, heading south, there's a stairway getting you down to grade in between buildings G4 and G5. But we really want to push the design to have better, you know, accessible transition down further south. So we just asked Sasaki to sort of respond to that so that there's ample opportunities for everyone, you know, to get down to Harbor Walk. Next slide. So this is a section of the park. If you look at the top left image, just shows you the sort of the section. So we're looking north at this section. So looking towards 15 Necco and the Summer Street Bridge, it just shows you the transition. Harbor Walk has been elevated. It in the past has been vulnerable to flooding, so it has been elevated a few feet through the design of 15 Necco, and it will be as well for 244A Street. It may experience, you know, flooding during extreme storm events well into the future, but the goal is to protect the neighborhood and the inland open spaces. So this, you see where the park terraces up about 5 feet to the kind of primary open space. Our goal is to keep as much flat open space as possible for programming and to kind of integrate this transition, this 5-foot transition, so it's not really dramatic, that it can be landscaped, but to do it soon, as you're stepping back, as opposed to sort of precluding active open space inland. You'll see the clay core berm. This just shows you an example of where that flood barrier could be integrated, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a clay berm. It could be a steel bulkhead, stone, cement, revetment. It will have to meet the requirements of FEMA. It will have to meet their standards, but it doesn't necessarily have to be at the water's edge. It could be set back, but has to meet their design performances. Next slide.
And Rich, one of the key reasons, because we get questions about this often, about why not elevating the harbor walk itself up to 20.5 in this design. And the primary reason is really for the benefit and quality of the public realm. And because you can meet those same resiliency goals while still preserving access to the water's edge and really integrating it in just a comprehensive way.
Joe, on that point, can you clarify, the harbor walk itself will be raised somewhat from what's there, so that 16 feet means that unless there's a storm, it will remain outside of the high tide, or?
That's correct. And portions of it already have along the national site.
So right now, I think we're using for these elevations is North American vertical datum. So if you see these target elevations, so if you use Boston City base, you just add 6 feet to these numbers. So Joe, will you go back? So if you look at the harbor walk elevation here, it's at 16, which is about 10 Boston City base, and much of the harbor walk along there is about an 8 to 9. So there is the opportunity to raise harbor walk and have it protected from a considerable flooding events. And this is another section. So this is again looking north at the rear section of the park, terracing down to Necco Street. So we're not raising the entire South Boston waterfront. So we need to integrate this flood barrier into a softer elevation change. So it will slope back down to Necco Street and a sidewalk roadway system. When you zoom in, next slide, I think zooms in a little further. So this shows you how the slope would be integrated, getting you back to Necco Street, and then the park that would be in between Necco Street and A Street Park. We're suggesting that this is a tabled roadway so that it's elevated at the same elevation of the sidewalks. So it actually could be closed down and stitches these two parks together. We're also looking to have as much parking for the public to enjoy these parks along the sides of the parks and the roadway networks as well. Next slide. And this just shows you the space in between the two buildings of G4, which was being built out by Related Beal and going through the public review process, and 15 Necco to the right. It shows you the space in between for the water feature, the landscape, and just the ability for the pedestrians to maneuver through the site. And we've just been really careful on the design so that these buildings do not privatize it, that there will be outdoor amenities for the ground floor uses, but it will feel like a public park, not that corporate campus. Next slide.
And also in the report itself, we will have detailed renderings, at least 3 to 4 of them, that actually show that perspective and give you a sense of what it will feel like to be in the neighborhood.
So jumping down to the next park, yes.
Can we pause? Kishore has his hand up. I want to give him a chance to ask. I think it's a timely question to where you are.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Rich, a great presentation. One question is if you have considered a bi-level harbor walk system, one that is going to be flooded, and in those cases, one that could be above the berm can also get at the problem of privatization you're talking about. If the upper level continuous harbor walk went along the buildings, then you won't have the problem of privatization.
Yes, yeah, we're planning for a path system along the building's frontage, as well as along Harbor Walk. Although, you know, the flooding of Harbor Walk isn't going to be chronic. You know, it's something that will be an available amenity for the community, you know, throughout the decades. Our target elevations are modular, so they can be modified to address, you know, additional flooding. But yes, we are looking to have sort of a secondary connection along the building frontages at our higher target elevation. So this shows you the inland park. We haven't named these parks. We're still following the sort of the code numbers that are in the plan development area in the zoning. But this is the park in between Necco Street and A Street will be built out by the 244 A Street site. It's an opportunity to connect South Bay Harbor Trail up by that north symbol to the left onto Necco Street and through these parks, crossing A Street down towards Wormwood Street or 4 Point Ave. We're still on the fence on the right of way, you know, should it be along Wormwood Street or Necco Street? We're working with the transportation department and our transportation planners on the intersection network along A Street. We want the safest connection for pedestrians and bikes across A Street, and need to look at, you know, where would it make sense to have intersections that they're spaced far enough apart. So it may be that the South Bay Harbor Trail gets flipped to Necco Street, at least the cycle track. But some of the amenities you see in this park is that sort of tabled street connecting the waterfront park to this park, a cycle track on Necco Street. So you see a shaded promenade, so having great tree canopy shade for people utilizing the space. A flex lawn for events and programming, nature play for children in the center of the park, and then amenities for people to picnic and grill. I know Brooklyn Bridge Park has great amenities like this that makes it a great attractions for multi-generation. So it helps with that destination quality of park, and then stitching together a picnic area with play area and passive lawn helps with that sort of multi-generational objective. And then we have the bike path, the cycle track coming through and connecting over to A Street. Next slide.
Some of those models that we were using for inspiration, like Rich said, did include Brooklyn Bridge Park, and then also the River Walk in Chicago too, where you have a great example of a sort of very accessible and active waterfront, and one that tears up towards a higher level of protection.
And just go back to that last slide, just shows you the elevations of the open space. Okay, next slide. And this is the park in between West Service Road and A Street. So respecting that there's a bunch of residential uses along A Street, we've got a sort of crescent-shaped lawn. We do have a cycle track connecting South Bay Harbor Trail, either on the Wormwood Street side or 4 Point Avenue side. That's something that we're still working with the transportation folks in City Hall on. And our goal is to have this connection hopefully built sooner, maybe working with the post office ahead of them selling off their property is our way to get South Bay Harbor Trail connected through here to West Service Road, since West Service Road will be finished within a few years with cycle tracks and connections down to Fan Pier. We have stormwater retention gardens, stormwater gardens, pollinator gardens, a meandering path going through the park. And I mentioned stormwater. This is all impervious area right now. So anything to green this space will be an improvement for stormwater, but to add additional stormwater retention as well. Keeping in mind that if you have a significant stormwater, a coastal storm, the stormwater systems here are gravitational, and there's nowhere for that stormwater to go. We now have a smart utilities policy that projects over 100,000 square feet need to hold another 0.25 inches of stormwater on site. So combining that objective with converting impervious area to pervious area will be a great contribution to stormwater control in this area. Next slide. So we've taken the liberty of rearranging some of the building footprints in the 100 acres master plan to have a better park at this terminus of the system at the Hall Road, having opportunity for more active play space at Dog Park, buffering the Hall Road, building in an opportunity for a pedestrian bridge to cross the Hall Road to the convention center in the future. We've been engaged with the post office, who seem interested in this. This would require an amendment to the master plan and the PDA. So that would be sort of a next action. So there would be some additional public engagement and a requirement for our board and the zoning commission to approve something like this. But we're excited for this opportunity to still allow new growth in this area, but to improve the open space from the 2006 plan. So you see multi-use sports courts, basketball, tennis, table tennis, roller skating park, a dog park, and a green buffer to the Hall Road. Next slide. And this is Medallion Ave, a green space that was just shown as a sort of a green Delta Park, where we're looking at amenities for the neighborhood, the specific amenity. So residential buildings open out onto the site. So how can it be passive enough not to, harm the people that live there, but still act as a great community amenity? So we're proposing community gardens, fitness stations, public art under trees, stormwater retention, pollinator opportunities. We have looked at shadow analysis with the full build and believe that there would be enough sunlight to have this program work. And that'll be noted in the plan. We do know that the community gardens, I think there are 8 gardens in A Street Park. There's a long waiting list. So want to sort of respect the need for these type of facilities in the neighborhood. Next slide. And that's it. That's the overview of the plan. All of these beautiful images will be integrated into I think like an 80-page document that will provide more context and details on the elevations, the target elevations, the programming. We'll be working on a section on implementation. This document will be adopted into PDA number 69 as the guidelines for open space. We'll talk about what are the future kind of ownership of the parks, whether it's the Parks Department, a nonprofit entity, and how these will be maintained in perpetuity. There's also a note that every generation a park usually needs to be upgraded, and we suggest that at least every 20 years that there's a community discussion about any possible revisions or changes to these parks to reflect where the city is at that time. We'll be putting out this document for public comment soon. It's being reviewed internally. So we'll be posting it on our website. We'll be hosting office hours for people to just meet up with Joe and I and others to discuss your comments and feedback and thank Boston Harbor Now for this opportunity to review the plan and help us with this public engagement process. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. So we have several questions that have started to come in during the presentation, and I want to give people a chance also to chime in and ask questions. You can either put them in the chat, you can raise your hand and call on you the way I did for Kishore. And I want to start with a question from Tom Rady. He asked if there is still 3.31 acres of open space in the final version. That was, I think, what was proposed in the original.
I think it's 4.4 or 4.2. I was doing the math this morning, so I think there's about 4 acres more than what was in the original plan.
Yeah, we had, this is something that Valerie had actually brought up at various community events that we were at, and we were making sure to articulate that very clearly in the draft preferred direction plan, exactly, you know, what each park total acreage is and what the other totals are. Should have probably had that more clearly on the presentation as well, but it's certainly something you will see in the draft preferred direction report.
Yep, that'll be very evident in the plan.
Great. Valerie, you have a question? I think you have a few questions.
Hi.
Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Rich. Rich, that was, and Joe, that was an amazing presentation. And it's, I have to say, I feel a little old. You and I have been on the, not that you're old, but you and I feel a little old because we've been at this for a very long time. But it's, I think it's really important to have the context that you were able to place this into. I think that makes a real difference and really highlights how much this part of the city and along the waterfront is changing. And I think you listen to the neighborhood in addition to other constituencies really well. And the plan, I think, is something that people are going to be really excited about. So I look forward to the opportunity for Fort Point and Seaport residents to get the same presentation. It was, the detail was terrific. So thank you. I have a comment about the water feature, which
Yes.
I think is, it's absolutely, it's terrific. I think it's something that will not only serve neighborhood, but also it will be a draw for people across the city to come to Fort Point Channel and enjoy a special feature. I think, I'm hoping that the water feature will continue to evolve because there are really a lot of very exciting waterfront treatments around the world that use water features almost year round. And they use water, they use steam, they use light. And the surface itself, which is fairly large as a plaza in relation to where the green space is, can itself be an artwork in some way with mosaics and color and so on. So I just wanted to sort of flag the water feature as something that could really continue to evolve. And I hope it's going to be, I hope we aspire to something really significant in terms of the water feature.
Great, thanks. So just on, this is a concept plan that will inform projects. When, the comment period for 244 A Street is wrapping up, we'll be issuing our scoping determination and asking the property owner to respond to this concept design to sort of build that into their draft project impact report. So they'll have to wait for this plan to become formal. So after the comment period and integration of any public comments. So then you'll see a response from Related Beal. And that'll start advancing. So the design of the park and these features, it'll be reviewed by the Boston Civic Design Commission. They've actually asked for an overview of this park. So the opportunities to weigh in on the design will sort of run the course of the project approval, including the Chapter 91 licensing process. So all along the city's urban design team will be reviewing this with community engagement. So yes, Valerie, I think we want something great here for this water feature that, is not just a water feature, but a great piece of landscape design.
And also, if I would just mention the significance or the real importance of the FPA first ground uses of both 15 NECO and is it G4? You know, I think it's especially with the water feature, that's going to attract a lot of people. So you're going to need restrooms, maybe lockers, changing rooms, food. So that the FPAs for 15 NECO and I think G4 are very important that they serve the park.
Yes, and I thank you for, there is a section in this plan. We had a sort of a later change of the scope of the project to have Sasaki look at the ground floor use and programming. So we gave them references to various Chapter 91 licenses. We did a walking tour with Sasaki back in August where we looked at good examples and bad examples, many of both, of ground floor activation and amenities. So there will be a ground floor sort of program section in this report that'll suggest things just like you mentioned, Valerie, including bathrooms, changing areas, lockers, also opportunities for civic space, cultural space, and even the type of FPA, not high-end restaurants with $20 hamburgers or expensive salads, you know, more not just that corporate amenity, but things for families. So that'll be incorporated in our comments on 15 NECO to the Chapter 91 licensing process, and also to our Article 80 review process for 244 A Street. And it will be in this document up for public comment as well.
Great.
Sarah, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Rich and Joe, for the presentation. Just had a couple comments, questions. One, you spoke about more passive use when you were describing the open space along Medallion and referencing the proximity to residents. And so I wanted to mention, and I apologize for the noise. So I'm curious a little bit about the positioning of the amphitheater right next to the residential building near the water. And then my other question is, during the related Beal presentations, we have seen some changes and shifting of direction of the building approach on the corner of A and Benford and how it interacts with the park. And it seems like the park has, during those iterations, has grown and shrank during the related Beal presentations. And I just wondered if you had a feel for at what size the park is in the related plans.
Just on the first question on, I didn't get the connection between residential uses and the Medallion and the amphitheater.
Sure, I may have misunderstood, Rich. I thought when you were talking about having more passive uses on Medallion, you referenced that it's because it's closer to residential.
Yes, yes.
And so then I was curious about the positioning of the amphitheater next to the residential building.
Right. Well, the amphitheater is sort of a passive use, but since it's on the water's edge and on Commonwealth Tidelands, it has a higher performance, requirement. And, putting it proximate to residents, is a challenge. But we point to really good Chapter 91 licenses, specifically Russell Wharf or Atlantic Wharf, where property owners are notified that they're adjacent to programmed active open space, which includes, daytime, nighttime activities. So the Medallion Ave doesn't have that opportunity for kind of heavy active programming use, but this waterfront park will have that opportunity. So we'll need to manage residents' expectations of, what they're either buying into or renting.
And then Rich, about the question about the size of the 4-Point Park that is closest to A Street. And that just the appearance that it got larger and then look, it appeared during the presentations just visually.
Overall-
to change in size?
Overall, it's still larger than what was in the zoning in the 2006 plan. I think we're trying to push that G6 building footprint along A Street and Binford Street. It still sort of overwhelms the sidewalk on both sides, and want an opportunity for a better pedestrian scale and for trees. And the wiggle room is along Wormwood Street. So, you might see the building shuffle a little bit. I don't know where that's going to end, but we're anticipating that park in between 4 Point Ave and Wormwood Street will be much larger than what is currently required by the zoning, but really can't speak on the specifics as that project's still going through the review process.
Thank you.
Sarah and Valerie, you guys had earlier questions in the chat as well. Sarah, you asked about the protection to allow for continuous use of the Harbor Walk. I feel like we got that with the elevation change. I didn't know if you had any other questions about that.
Well, just on that, and I meant to point out for an example of a new resilient park, and that's Martin's Park. So if you go down towards the aquarium, the Children's Museum, and you hit Martin's Park, which is a brand new park system, it acts as a flood barrier. When it was under the design process, there was an elevation built into it just as part of the design. And when we were looking at target elevations for flood barriers, we saw an opportunity to modify the park, not really in design, but what's underneath everything, to put in sort of hard infrastructure underneath that berm. So you'll walk along the park, along Harbor Walk, and you'll notice that elevation change. That is the flood barrier. So at a extreme coastal storm, flood, high flood elevation, that Harbor Walk could flood, but the barrier behind it would prevent the waters from getting into the community. There is a sort of a break in between those two drumlins where a deployable barrier will have to be put in place. We prefer not to have to use deployables because it's always that human failure component, and that's why we haven't proposed too many deployables in the sort of southern section. But Harbor Walk may flood at extreme storm events when you're probably not going to be outside, but just for everyday use of the waterfront, it would remain available.
Thank you.
Valerie, you'd asked about grade changes. Has that been addressed?
Yes, I think some of the illustrations really helped understand that. They're much more, they have good detail in them. Am I correct in understanding that the Harbor Walk will be at 16.5? The development and the land goes up to 21.5, and then it slopes down to A Street, which is at 16.5. So I guess that's what I got from the presentation today. And then the second question related to that is, how much natural stormwater storage capacity do these two parks mean for Fort Point?
Yeah, so those are the grades. I think that we'll have more details on the stormwater capture compared to the impervious area. So
Right.
That will be detailed in the report.
Right.
And Rich, to be fair, Harbor Walk sort of ranges between 14.5 and 16.5.
But Joe, isn't your intended end state after the development of an abutting project to be 16.5, or is there still going to be some at 14.5 at 14?
It is, except for some of the portions that have already been completed along National, where they're not quite up at 16.
I see.
All right. There was a question right at the beginning from Tom about tunnel access and MassDOT's need to access the tunnel under these parks. How has that been designed for?
So we've been, so that access to the emergency egress for the I-90 tunnel will remain in place. So you'll have a generous amount pathway for vehicles to service that facility, but also Gillette's pump building. We've also presented these designs to ISD and Boston Fire Department to bring them up to speed so that there is ability for emergency vehicles to service these buildings as needed, but also to service anything occurring on the Harbor Walk. We've had those discussions. We'll probably continue to discuss things, and both projects will be required to meet the ISD Boston Fire Department standards for
Thanks,
access.
Thanks, Rich. It's Tom. The question was really focused on the inland park. So every 5 to 10 years, it seems like MassDOT has to actually dig up the parking lot to get access to, there's something called the super plug, and it apparently leaks every now and then. So if you put a bunch of trees there, you're just going to be ripping the trees up. So I noticed the green space was on the NECO side of the inland park and the trees were on the A Street side. That as you evaluate that particular requirement, it may impact, how you lay that park out.
Yeah, that's good to know. We were engaged with MassDOT when we were designing the flood barrier, and that never really came up, but we can follow up with them, Tom. That's great feedback.
Excellent. In terms of meeting with those other state officials or sort of transitioning to permitting, Joshua asked about the berm permitting, and I think you guys alluded to the fact that that's that's a later stage. You need to get to one more phase of design before you reach out to permitting people.
Right, we have to do the environmental assessment is next, Alice. So, and then we would get into the design and permitting for the project.
Okay. And it looks like Bud has a question that I'll just let him ask directly.
Seems like it's always my duty to ask what the price tag for all this is. So we've talked about it before. I think this is potentially a really good plan. So what's the number look like, and refresh our memories about how it gets paid for and maintained?
We have not established a cost estimate for this. So I don't know. I do know that when we were doing the 100 acres open space planning, the master planning, for these open spaces, we had a cost per square foot about $100 and a cost per linear foot for the roadways. And those are outdated numbers. That's where we came up with the number for the sinking fund. So there's a agreement between the property owners on how these parks are, the funding available to build out these parks, and did based upon that cost per square foot and linear foot, did the math and divided it by the amount of entitlements given, and I think we came up to be $12 a square foot. These parks are going to be more than that. These parks are also subject to Chapter 91 and the Commonwealth Tideland standards. That those tideland standards for Commonwealth Tidelands don't have a price associated with them. If you look at what National is investing in their open space, it's well beyond that sinking fund contribution, and they are on board with us on integrating this design into their southerly open space design. So I don't have a figure. We'll probably have to sort those things out. I think the most important figure is the year-to-year maintenance, and how those will be, how that'll be achieved collectively, not parcel by parcel, subsection by subsection.
One little thing to note on this subject, I've been the finance committee of the Rose Kennedy Greenway for 4 or 5 years. The most popular feature by bar none on the Greenway is the Rings Fountain. And I would encourage you to develop an equally exciting and complex water feature as you're looking at this. It seems like it's incorporated in the design. I would also urge you to double and triple and quadruple the operation and maintenance costs of taking care of it, because it's immensely complicated.
Great. Thanks, Bud.
Yep.
Valerie has her hand up again, but I also want to say if anyone else is on this call and wants to chat a question or raise their hand, we're willing to hear from everyone. Go for it, Valerie.
Okay. Rich, I'm so glad that you mentioned maintenance. I know that seems far down the road when we're at this sort of program stage, but I have to say that the maintenance plan for A Street Park has been terrific. The private developer provides really high quality maintenance. The park looks beautiful and functions really well all the time. And because it's a City of Boston park, everyone feels really welcome in it. There's no sense of privatization. And especially with the community garden. The community garden is small, it's 8 people, but because it's a City of Boston park, anyone in the city can apply for a plot. And recently we had our lottery, and we have people, from South Boston, we have people from Seaport, we have people from Broadway, St. Vincent's. So it's this idea of having the Fort Point Parks be part of the citywide system of parks is really important. So I wanted to just support the idea that these become the ownership is, and they function as public parks, and that the maintenance then is done through the developers' contributions, because that combination has worked really well at A Street Park.
And the Parks Department feels strongly about keeping this model for these other parks in public ownership. And that's a great suggestion, Valerie. On our sort of implementation chapter, which we're still drafting, we can reference the maintenance costs and the arrangement for A Street Park. So we can put that in there just as a point of reference. So thanks for that input.
Sarah, do you want to go ahead and just ask some of the questions you're putting in the chat about the berm designs public
Sure.
process?
So as everyone is sparking really great comments, it's sparking other questions. And so one thing that I was listening to a presentation for Climate Ready downtown and learning a little bit about some of the solutions, and one of the preferred solutions seemed to be raising the water's edge, including the elevation of the harbor walk. And I was just curious on how the thinking has evolved in terms of a 2020 solution to raise the harbor walk, and what we came out with an earlier solution. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there as a question, and then also ask whether the berm design that is down the road, it has a public process element.
Rich, I'll jump in on that second one. Yeah, Sarah, we do anticipate a public process. But as we mentioned earlier, we're sort of at the last stage of obtaining funding. This environmental assessment that will be kicking off soon is that last milestone before, and not fully approved yet, of course, but before hopefully receiving that funding. And then we will kick into an RFP process, which will include a public process element of the design.
Well, that public process will be part of the permitting. It's not a distinct public process, because timing is critical. So it will require a wetlands permit. It will require a Chapter 91 license. I don't think an Army Corps permit would be needed, but we'd certainly include Army Corps in the outreach. And I think at least those 2 steps. So there will be public comment periods embedded with those efforts. And then just for the examples of raised harbor walk in downtown, there's a sort of a mix. Harbor walk could be elevated where we've built buildings right up to the water's edge, but our goal is to have more of a slope transition where there's a lot of room to work with. So if you look at Waterfront Park or Christopher Columbus Park, we're not proposing to raise the harbor walk at the water's edge, but to have that transition sort of further inland. So it really depends, Sarah, on the context and the built environment.
Thanks for that. There wasn't quite that detail in the presentation I saw, so that's really helpful to understand. And then just my last, well, actually, I just put it in it was a comment. Just we talked about emergency access earlier, and particularly to the harbor walk and the water sheet when boats are unable to get underneath the bridges to do water rescues. If that having an emergency access incorporated into the scoping document for related Beal is possible, that might be beneficial.
I think we'd note that as context. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Go for it, bud.
Alice, I think we're good. Thank you, everybody. You know, I just want to say, I think on behalf of most of what I saw in terms of shaking heads and comments, I think this has really moved in a good direction. And I think it looks like you've all been listening quite well. I think you gathered a lot of good input from the various meetings. And I think this is all going to tie together, and we have the potential to make this a really great piece of the Boston waterfront. Devils will be in the details as always, but it's, you know, like we're headed the right way. So thank you very much. And thanks always for participating, Alice, for organizing this. Our next, we want to show a clap of hands for these folks, that everybody can do that. Thank you. And Alice, our next public use forum, Harbor Forum, is in December. Do we have a date for that? I think it's
16th.
December 16th. So we have a topic yet, or more to be determined?
Dorchester Bay City.
Dorchester Bay City. So we look forward to seeing everybody at that, and maybe we'll have a little eggnog and bourbon somehow. Thank you all.